Hello, so what we're going to do today is set up a simple economist supply and demand model to explain how we make choices on products that we buy and produce. So we set up a simple model for a product like electricity or transport, where there are private costs that are now paid by business and households. So when they do the transaction, and these are the costs of labour, machines, materials and so on. But also there will be what we'll call external costs. So this is the pollution that then changes the climate and then has costs on others. And we're going to talk about marginal costs. So if I increase output by a little bit, how much extra private costs, so that's the MPC, marginal private cost. We're going to talk about marginal external cost, the MEC, which says if I produce a little bit more product and a little bit more pollution, what are the additional changes to climate and the costs of that climate change? And then what puts these two costs together is the so-called marginal social cost. And if we put these two together, the marginal social cost is the marginal private cost, what you and I pay for labour, materials and so on, plus the marginal external cost, the additional cost of the pollution through to climate change. And we want to use our models to explain the market failure with pollution and climate change. So we want to show that if you just leave it to the market and you ignore greenhouse gas pollution and climate change, you'll get things wrong. And we'll actually show the magnitude of those gains to society. And so this really provides us the a priori argument that government should intervene on the way markets do stuff. So this is the justification down the track for carbon taxes, regulations on renewable energy, that sort of thing. And further, we can actually find a benchmark. What is the right level of pollution? Turns out it won't be zero, and it won't be business as usual. And it won't necessarily be the scientists' claim of no more than 2-degree temperature change. And there lies some debates between the economist and the meteorologist. So let's talk about the operation of a market with pollution. So we'll think about fossil fuel production of electricity. So when you and I purchase electricity, or when businesses purchase electricity, this price does not include an allowance for the cost of the greenhouse gases. It just has those private costs in it, not the external cost. Similarly, when sellers are putting their costs together, they only think about the private costs. They regard dumping the pollution in the atmosphere as a free good. So that goes out as zero. And so what really happens is the market chooses a quantity where the price that you and I pay as a buyer and that the electricity generator gets as a seller, that's just equal to the marginal private cost. It ignores the external cost. Again, so the greenhouse gases is dumped into the atmosphere for free, and that's because essentially nobody owns the atmosphere. It's a common resource as we use. So let's set ourselves up with a model. So what we're going to have here is the market for electricity, and on the horizontal axis, here I start at zero electricity and I move out in this direction. We have more electricity produced and consumed. On the vertical axis, we have the price or the cost of electricity. And so if we're at this point, it's worth nothing. And as we go up here, it becomes more and more expensive. And so we're going to use this market model to describe what people want and what they don't want. So what we're going to do now is explain how we represent buyer decisions. So we can think of this as a household or a business buying electricity. And let's suppose we start at an initial point here, A, and let's suppose for simplicity the price is 10 and we're purchasing 10 units also of the product. Now if we were to cut the price down here to say 9, we generally expect that people will buy more of the product. Say we go from 10 to 12 out here at point B. Well, what's going on? Well, as the price of the electricity has become cheaper, some people have decided, well, I'll buy that other gadget that uses a bit more electricity. They might decide, well, now electricity is a bit cheaper, I can run the air conditioner a little bit warmer in winter and a little bit cooler in summer. Or I don't even have to think that hard about turning the switches off. I just walk out of the house and I'll come back. And so what we observed that as we reduce the price, people will buy more of the product. Another way we can think about that is that as I increase my consumption of this product from 10 to 12, another 2 units, I'm willing to give up other goods and services worth 9. So I can think of this curve showing me the marginal private benefit of more and more products. So if there's very little of it, the marginal private benefit or value of the last unit is pretty high. But if I've got lots and lots of the product, then the last one didn't turn me on that much. The additional benefits, the additional marginal private benefit, falls as I get more and more of it. And for simplicity, we're going to assume that marginal private benefits that you and I as a business or a household get are exactly the same as society benefits. So that's the demand story. Let's now consider the story on the supply side. So again, we have on our horizontal axis the quantity of electricity or aluminium or whatever we like, our desired product, and on the vertical axis we have the price of the product. Let's again suppose we start at point A, where the price is 10, and we've got 12 units of the product. Now if we were to lift the price, say from 10 to 11, it would now become profitable for the firm to produce some more product. They might use a slightly older machine or somewhere with less accessibility, their costs go up. And so these quantity increases, say, to 14. So we shift up to point B. So what we have as a supply curve is as the price that's offered to firms to produce electricity, transport and so on, the more they're willing to provide. So our supply curve is upward sloping. We also know that that's roughly equal to what we call the marginal private cost. So that's the costs of the labour, the materials and the machinery and the skills of people. And so when we're only producing a little bit of the product, say only 12 units, the marginal private cost is relatively low at 10. But if we're going to increase the quantity from say 12 to 14, then the additional or marginal private cost increases. So this supply curve represents also for us the marginal private cost. Okay, so now let's put the demand curve and the supply curve together. Again, we've got the same quantity on our axis of the desired product, and we've got the price on the vertical axis. We've got our downward sloping demand curve, which also represents marginal private benefit, and we've got the upward sloping supply curve, which represents marginal private cost. And so when buyers interact with sellers, we'll actually determine how much is produced and consumed at what we call the equilibrium, and that will be at this point E, where the two curves intersect. At this point E, market price will be say 10, and the quantity will be say 15. And why is it an equilibrium? Well, suppose the price was a little bit higher, up here at 12. if we went across at this price 12, yes, business would want to offer more because they're a higher price, they would bring in less productive plants. But because the products become more expensive, some of us decide we don't want to buy as much electricity. So quantity demanded at this level is much less than what's on the market. There's an excess supply. There's a tendency for the price to fall. On the other hand, if we had a much lower price, say here at 9, business would reduce their production because they can't cover costs, but because it's got cheaper, we want to buy more. And so there'll be many more buyers out there than sellers, and we would bid the price up towards the equilibrium. And so if we just left it to a market, then we would produce here where the marginal private cost is equal to the marginal private benefit. And that's how markets will sort out how much to produce and consume. Now that's just taking into account private benefits and costs. In our market, this is not taking account of pollution of greenhouse gases and how they affect society's optimal decision. And that's what we'll look at in the next session.